All right, so I did one of these for De Benedetto when I was mixing that album. This is a song called Set Fire to Babylon. This is off of Andrew Crest's album. The album's called Kabal. My folder has other names and stuff in there for it. Azrael, I think. So I'm not sure. We change names and stuff around a lot around here. Uh, so this is more of a kind of a, I don't know how to describe this, kind of a punk pop kind of thing, I guess. It's got some pretty aggressive guitars in it with some really aggressive guitar lines. This particular song has a lot of synth in it. It's got machine track, a damage track, some Moogs, some Fairlight. I'd have to say that probably 80% of the stuff I do has a Fairlight in it, even though I didn't put this in. Andrew did. And then we use a combination of digital drums and live brass. The digital drums are usually a DW for kick and all of the toms, and then 90% of the stuff I do in the studio I use Jeff Ochiltree snare. So I like it. It's a tree brass. It's a phenomenal sounding snare drum, and I build all of my mixes so I can hear that tree brass. It's kind of funny. Anyway, we're going to talk about the process for mixing this. Like I said, this album has a bunch of pretty aggressive guitar parts and stuff in it, and a lot of subtleties. So I put a lot of subtleties in my mixes. If you can see that I'm highlighting stuff. I don't know if you can see that or not. Oh yeah, I guess you probably could, sort of. Anyway, these are some guitar quarter strokes. They're probably pretty quiet in the mix. There is some really cool vocals that are underneath, buried in a reverb thing that they go with a verse, but they also kind of fill in the spaces between verses and stuff. Andy has a very cool vocal sound, and we usually double him. So he has he'll sing either an alto line, and then we'll double him with either two more alto lines or two soprano lines that he sings, and then one single baritone or a tenor, depending on what mood he was in that day. So you have like a high voice, a couple low voices, and then a really low voice. And that's how I developed that sound. This all came from Andy's own studio. So, like, this original vocal take was his from his old studio with an Audio Technica. I had to I wanted to keep that. I wanted to keep a lot of the stuff that he'd recorded. Sometimes artists just kind of get it and they get it right. Most of the stuff that Andy writes is very subjective. So, trying to preserve the stuff that he's done in his house and then just, add to it is kind of my goal. So his first verse and second verse were done at his place, and then there's like a third verse here, which we did here. So I had to kind of preserve that same sound, because we have U87 and U47s and microphones like that in our studio. And okay, so here's something that's really interesting about this particular song. There's no bass guitar in this one. The bass is a synth, and the original bass had the bass synth had like harmonics and stuff like that, or partials, I guess you'd call it, in the bass part. Here's the synth bass here. What I did was, on the EQ, I killed all of the upper stuff. So it was like a high cut at what does it go down to? 154 hertz. So this is what it sounded like without the high cut in. So when you hear the song, you'd be like, "Oh, I see why he did that." Because I wanted the bass, but I didn't need all the other crap in there. It's gonna get crushed by the vocals and crushed by, because it's a chorus line anyway, and crushed by all of the guitars. So no one's ever gonna hear any of that stuff. So why not just keep everything as pristine as possible. Like, for example, guitars are rolled off at 145 hertz in this song. The kick drum, I think they're rolling that one off at like 40 hertz or 50. I like having a thump in the track, but this whole album has a lot of really really fast kicks and stuff in it. So you have a kind of a old Danmark click, the little kick pad things used to have. So you want to try and keep that so you can hear the speed that Keith Runco is playing. This song doesn't have a lot of that, but it's an album, so you want to keep it all together. So we're just going to run the tracks, and then we're just going to talk a little bit about how I'm blending everything together. The song starts off with a machine drum loop, and it kind of kicks into a damaged drum loop with Keith coming in with the drums. In the beginning, though, there is some real drums, but they're just kind of quiet. Oh yeah, so you can hear in the guitars there's like an octave. It goes up and then it goes down to an octave. That's a whammy pedal. We're using that as a 12 steps down, so it's a full octave down on the guitar. I do that a lot. We've also been loaned a baritone electric from Ian Rossiter, which goes on almost every song. So there's also the option of that in the studio. Almost inevitably, that the baritone guitar is in every song that we produce here. The whammies in a lot of this stuff. Jason Boris taught me, or whatever, turned me on to the whammy pedal. So I went and bought one, and then I discovered that my Helix has a whammy built into it anyway. So one of our other guitarists, Richie's got the whammy pedal at his house now. I don't really have to have it dragged around here with all its cords and its ridiculous power supply. Also, a word about guitars. This album, for the most part, the guitar sounds were kind of already built. Like, I'd already designed guitar sounds for a lot of the projects that I have in here. So normally what we do with the guitar sound, and on Andy's other tracks, when we first started working on them, this is exactly how we did it. We do what's called a reamping. So you have the guitar sound coming into a processor or an amplifier or whatever around the studio. We record that and the guy playing, and then we also record just a direct track of his guitar, just raw right into the board through like a DI or something. Our Kemper has a direct out built into it. The Helix has a direct out built into it. So generally you'll see on tracks we do, you'll see like down here, there's electric, then there's the reamp channel, electric, and reamp channel. And if we got it right the first time, the reamp channel's turned off and we're using the electric channel. But when you're mixing and you're finding that the song is stuck as far as the mix goes, you can't get the guitars to cut through, or you had to knock such a big hole out to cover the vocals that your guitars have lost all of their edge, you can always go back to your reamp channel, either reprocess it or run it through a different amp or whatever, what have you, and then re-record that new sound down and leave that as a track, and then keep going on and on and on. So there's a lot to so instead of just fixing it in the mix, a lot of guys will just EQ the living hell out of stuff. I'm a big proponent of fixing it with the microphone. I honestly think if you have to EQ your snare to death, you've got either a really shitty sounding snare, or you're using the wrong microphones for that snare. Same with guitars. If you're bringing a guitar amp in and you've got it and you've mic'd it the way you like miking it, with either 257s or 609s or whatever, 421s, 441s, one of my favorite mics for a guitar. On those old EVs, the 308s or whatever they were, those were cool. If you're EQing the hell out of your, go back and redo the guitar part, or reamp it, or just, learn how to get a good guitar sound, because that you're killing your mix just EQing the stuff. You won't find a lot of EQ on any of the stuff that we put. I mean, this guitar here is just rolled off, like we got it. Same with snares. And in this case, I added some bass to the snare because I've got two snares running. One is from that machine loop, and then the other is our Tree. I wanted to separate them a little bit. I want to keep the ping and stuff from the Tree, but there still needs to be a little bit of bottom in it, and I just needed to have a little bit of bass to it. But my point was, I never EQ a snare. If you have to EQ a snare, you're using the microphones wrong. So you'll very seldom see me EQing a snare. Kick drums, yeah, big time. Toms, yeah, big time, especially depending on the heads. But snare, no, almost never. So anyway, let's go back to the song here, and we'll talk about some of the guitar.
Shadows burn into the concrete. History repeats itself, so our time may come. The gods rain fire from the heavens above unto the sinners below, until there is none. Nothing really matters and nothing is for.
So we've got kind of like it's not really a rappy kind of a thing. It's like a Rage Against the Machine kind of whatever. But Andy also, we have the same influences as far as old punk and old rock and stuff like that. So I was a huge Adamant fan. I like producing his vocals to sound like an Adamant kind of a thing, or a Black Flag, or that kind of thing. Like just got angst and stuff like that. This is what it would sound like if they had auto-tune back then, but they didn't. So again, the bass hasn't kicked in here yet. So the bass comes in. The synth bass comes in a second here, and it comes in after a damaged thing. So what I've been running here is the drum track, the machine loop. There's two synths going on here. One is just a Moog, and then the other one's like this kind of Fairlighty kind of thing. But also in the background is the vocals inside this really, really cool verb thing. And I'm just going to run that for a second. This is so that's what's running in the background underneath the main verse. I don't know what the heck he's singing there. It's like the Manum song from Sesame Street. But when it's alone by itself, it's a really cool effect and stuff. And I really like that. I like it when people experiment with the equipment. I find that in the production or when we're doing the post-production of the songs, we don't have a lot of time for experimenting. You just kind of go to things you're going to use in the mix later on, like octaves, vocals, or trailing verbs, or dovetailed reverbs and delays, and all that, and vocal synths. I have a vocal synth that I use all the time too. So but something like that I would have never done in studio. I would have never come up with that. I wouldn't just bury a nattery vocal with verb and shove it in the background. But as a producer, you hear that and you're like, okay, I totally know where I'm going to put that in the mix. That's going to be really, really cool. So, and it also thickens up the voice because he recorded with an ATK, or the Audio Technica, I call it an ATK. There's a really kind of a thin sound to it. And I think it was maybe standing across the street from when he was singing into it or something like that. I don't know. But it does kind of work for his voice, so we left it.
They were judged by the angels to hell with the heavens, cause that stairway's tall.
Also, the Clash piano sound is pretty cool. Pretty liking that. Okay, so I watched Damage come in here, and I wanted to just double check to make sure there was no low pass or low cut on the thing. So when you have drum loops like that, like a kick drum like an 808, or Damage loop that has a very percussive sound to it, but the whole point of the sound is that really low subsonic bass and stuff like that. You don't want to put any kind of a cut on that. Any kind of synth drums or something like that, you don't want to put a low cut on that. So I made sure that the Damage thing just kind of sits up. So imagine if you were, watching this with your whatever subs cranked, it would probably be shaking the house. Also, my floor toms go into the subs. I roll them off at 65, maybe, somewhere around there. And then the kick drum, I roll off a little bit into the subs, especially for this kind of stuff, because his kick drums get really, really fast, and that's just inaudible on sub level.
Quarantine, death camp, curfews, check stop, martial law, killer cops. Wait a minute, what the fuck? Genocide, ISIS, Ebola, virus, worldwide crisis, Illuminati,
So you see the bass comes in, the synth bass. Also, this is a kind of an interesting thing. When I was originally working on the song and producing it, we had put these guitars in. That's a whatever. This Chris's really cool lick. But while we were actually working on the song and I was moving it around and cutting it up and figuring out which is the best verses and choruses and stuff, we turned those tracks down really, really far. So it's probably been, we started on this project 7 or 8 months ago. So it's probably been as long and a good 30 or 40 songs between there that Chris has probably forgotten that he played this part. So it'll be kind of, now that it's back in the mix and stuff, it's going to be fun to watch his expression when he goes, oh yeah, I remember that. So that's kind of neat.
This Illuminati, Samia, prophecy, heresy, conspiracy, policy, bureaucracy, democracy, hypocrisy, atrocity, one world government, new world order, our sons and our daughters, lambs to slaughter. Set fire to Babylon.
So Shimmer does our vocal editing and stuff like that, and the original of this, Andy had sang at his place at the ATK, and it was kind of somehow he merged it together on the output.
Set fire to Babylon, 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 Babylon.
And so I played it for her, and she was like, yeah, you got to recut that because that's really bad. And I'm like, but it sounds so cool. There's so much angst and stuff there. And she's like, yeah, you got to recut that. So Andy came in and recut it the other day. And then we just edited it today. That's why the song's up, and that's why I thought I'd do a video.
Set fire to Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
So in this section coming up, you're really going to hear this vocal thing in the background. And I'll turn it off. Yeah, it's empty without it. And there's the Fairlight coming in too. And then this is the new verse he recorded here.
Socialist, deathless, handshake, last kiss, DOA, dealing miss, severed head, trees of potassium, chloride, chromium, bromide, state of synthesis.
So when I'm doing a double tracking of a part like an alto or a tenor or something like that, I do as a double track. So it's a left and a right. Most of the time they're hard panned. I'm a big fan of hard panning. Actually, I do the goofy pan with my toms as well. But sometimes, like in pop songs, if you can't do hard pans all the time, it's actually really, really distracting. So we bring it in a little bit, especially if later on you're processing like a pop song through like an extra stereo spread effect or something. Yeah, you get some really strange artifacts going on when it's a right all the way into the left, and then they face cancel it out, and it distracts from the pop song. But in this kind of stuff, you can do all sorts of really cool stuff like that. But anyway, I was just gonna mention that all of the background vocals that he did, or all the alternates, are all left and rights.
My state of sense of suicide, close your eyes, bye-bye, victory, misery, modern day history, liberty, trickery, artillery, delivery, new world government, UN order, the sons and the daughters, just set fire to Babylon, Babylon.
All right, so yada yada yada, back into the chorus. This is a double chorus, and then it comes out into a guitar solo. And normally a guitar solo is mono. You take it in the middle channel, you do a reamp, all your echoes are added in post in the computer or on your machine, so your echoes become stereo, or else you're recording like tons and tons of guitar tracks. And I never commit delay to tape because you just never know. And then what I'll do on some guitar tracks is I'll have the delay feed back into like a verb on a different bus. So your delay bus goes back into a verb bus, and it's very subtle. And then all your delays, echoes, whatever, have a little bit of verb on them, which is really cool. Normally, in songs with vocals and stuff, you don't EQ the vocal. Um, you don't do subtractive EQ on the main vocal channels themselves because you want that to go into your effects, into your delays, into your reverbs and stuff, and you do it post all of that stuff. So then your delays and all of your reverbs and stuff all have all of the frequencies in, and then you can take those frequencies out on their own returns. So that's generally what we do. In rock stuff, though, I generally don't EQ the echoes or the reverbs coming back. I just let the top, keep singing out. Because the songs are so cluttered, you want the harmonics just to kind of carry over and multiply and do whatever cool-ass things they do, rather than spending so much time trying to control the fidelity of the mix. You want to kind of give it, kind of let it go, like let it take a kind of a randomness. So the echoes coming back on the whammies are not EQ'd. So at the end of the whammy thing, you're going to hear it get really weird and kind of cool, and all of those echoes will be preserved, or especially on the reverbs. I have an Abbey Roads chamber on this one, and you'll hear the chamber in it at the end, because it's not EQ'd. So, and then this particular one, I had him do the solo twice with the whammy for a left and right channel. And when you do those, you don't want it to be perfect unless you're doing like heavy muted stuff. But if you're doing just really cool stuff, you want to kind of just let him play it and, take your best takes and make sure your parts line up to start. And then just, and then try to get them so they end the same too. But any little kind of discrepancies in the middle are really kind of cool. It just gives you that stereo image.
Babylon, Babylon, Babylon.
So we're into the very end of the song now. The bass is going to come back in. And it kind of has that little skip, that loopy, and I went for that. Obviously I could have changed that, but I didn't want to. And the original vocal he recorded at his house, I decided to sneak that in there. Shimmer doesn't know. And I kind of got that Lenny Kravitz guitar thing at the end too that Chris wrote. That was a reamp channel as well, and then we just went with the Kemper, the sound that we got, because we just got it. One of the nice things here, I could see my tracks at the end. One of the nice things about using a hybrid drum kit in the studio is you can, pound the hell out of your toms and just keep looping it, sort of like we do live. Do kind of like a virtual sound check, so you can get your EQs on your toms exactly the way you want them. And now we're just going to talk a little bit about the mix/mastering end of this. So I'm one of those engineers that masters as they go and mixes and masters. That is to say that this song, once it's mixed and set up as a single, can be released straight to radio. It's no problem. I was part of the people that were in the loudness wars, obeying all of the laws and rules. I am not now. They screwed me on my last album with the Benedetta. I went with the 14 Luffs thing and got hosed. It sounds great. The album sounds fine, except that, it's quieter. Everybody else is on freaking iTunes and stuff. And the only reason for that is because people don't use that autoplay correction thing where it takes all of the super loud, crappy sounding stuff and shrinks it down. I have a real problem with crushing the dynamic range of a mix. I do not like hearing brittle cymbals. I like everything to be nice and clean, and I like a nice dynamic range. If something's quiet in a mix, it should be quiet in the mix. But having said that, 14 lufs, that just didn't cut it. Like that's way too quiet for what I'm doing. And people are whatever. Everybody was really mad, and I was furious because I was like, no, this is exactly the way it has to be. They told us 14. That's it. That's the most for Netflix. Most of our stuff gets placed in TV shows and stuff like that. So, uh, it has to be that way. But having said that, I'm now a minus or a 10 lefts type guy. So this mix is sitting at
Set fire to Babylon, Babylon.
I don't know, 11 or something like that. I move it around until I make sure that the cymbals don't get destroyed, and then I go from there. So it's kind of an audio thing. There's no magic button for this, but if there were one, the plugin Isotope made called Ozone 9 is the magic button. So when I'm tracking a song, I will use the Lursen mastering plugin, and I have my settings set up. It's like a preset that I load in. This is what I like hearing, and I build my mixes and record everything sort of based to fit the Lursen thing. And usually it sounds really, really good. The other plugin I have that's a mandatory one on my mix bus is the Greg Wells Mix Centric. Number one, Greg's a genius, and he's Canadian, and he's super cool. And his Mix-centric thing was like the magic bullet for me. I don't know what he's got going on in there. It's really cool, though. Let me tell you, if you're gonna buy one plugin and you're a mix engineer, that's the one. One of the problems with Greg, his plugin is that's interesting. There's a dip at my at 50 hertz. I wonder why. Is his plugin generates noise. 50 hertz, usually there's a little bit at 100 and some other octave of 50 up in here. So I'm not sure why he did that. When you get into plugins that generate noise for authenticity, and trust me, as I'm a 50-year-old, I'm an old engineer, we fought tooth and nail to get stuff to be freaking quiet. We hated hum and buzz and whatever, and I literally don't understand why guys are building this into their plugins. But for my CLA2, my CLA3, my 76, my Brooks Sirens, all of the other main, and those are compressors, all those main plugins, you can turn it off. Like here, get rid of the noise. All of the Abbey Road stuff, the chamber plate, again, you can turn off the hum. And Greg decided to go with a 50 hertz hum, so it's kind of a British thing, right? In America, we're at 60 hertz for our power. Britain's 50 hertz for their power. So what I had to do, and everybody complains about this too on the Waves plugin thing about Greg's noise that he added to what's possibly the best outboard best finalizing plugin that's ever been designed for mixing. Everybody hates it. So anyway, I bought a noise canceling thing called Z Noise, and I built a preset called Greg Killer, and that gets rid of the noise that the Mix-centric plugin generates. I use the Crystal Algae mixdown, a little bit of glue that I use. I'm assuming that this is an SSL because that's what Chris mixes on, and I don't think there is a mix in the world that doesn't go through an SSL master bus at some point, especially now. It's just the most pristine, cleanest master bus compressor you can get without coloring your mix. It just shapes it better, I guess. It's like what a compressor should really, really do. And I had a little bit of trouble from Chris's plugin. This mix in particular has a C4 in it. And this isn't something I normally do anymore. It'd be interesting to hear the mix without it. I didn't notice it was plugged in there before. But the isotope's going to change all that anyway. And then I use the SSL master bus. Everybody does. Normally I have it up around 10 for makeup gain. I really like to pound on it. But even at 2 to 1, there's a clarity that you get with the amount of compression you get from the SSL without pumping. It's just a beautiful plugin. I just want to, out of curiosity, I'm going to run a few seconds of this. I'll go back to the isotope, and I'm going to turn off the C4.
Set fire to Babylon.
Yeah, a little bit more mid in there than I don't know. Suck out 128 looks like. What is my, wow, actually that's a lot. Yeah, I'm not sure why that was like a year ago I plugged that in. Normally I don't use those, but I went with it. Okay, so here's why that works still, even though it's an older, I'm not a big compression fan for multiband and stuff like that to fix things in the mix. I don't have the ears for that. I use an F6 on vocals, which is a multi-band EQ to EQ, like it's a multi-band dynamic EQ is what it is, and you can set the Q on each of the frequencies and how quickly it reacts and how much it attenuates. So if you have like really kind of a 3K or 4K whistle in a vocalist, you can use the F6 to trim it down quite a bit, and then if it gets really pronounced as the person's performing, the F6 will adapt to that as well. I find that a better use than like a compressor to do that. Like we used to use compressors to de-S stuff. I can channel and nail an S like right out of a mix if I wanted to with the F6 rather than using a compressor and crushing everything around it. I'm just going to turn off the Greg Wells thing. So when I'm writing or working on the songs, I have the Lursen in. There's the EQ sounds that I like for a master bus based on one of their presets. They use a SSL comp as well. So there's a lot of SSL stuff in here. Like all my drums are all through SSL channels and whatnot. But when I'm mixing into the final mastering, I use the Ozone 9 plugin. And I find that for whatever reason, it actually you can see it's kind of, I was at 128 hertz where I was sucking stuff out, and you can see the Ozone 9 is kind of rebuilding my mids there off that compressor. The Ozone plugin seems to make the exact same choices I made with the Lursen. So either the guys at Ozone have crappy ears like me, or we all have really, really great ears. So I'm happy about that. You can't prep a mix with the Ozone 9 plugin in place because the compressor grabs everything so rapidly. It's got a dynamic EQ in it, and the maximizer will just go nuts. So if you're like soloing a vocal to edit it, it's just all distorted and horrible sounding. So it's working its butt off doing stuff. So I prefer to just use the Lursen. It's nice and smooth sounding. I know what it's going to sound like, and then I plug in Isotope, and then I will run it under their master assistant, get the maximizer the way that they want it for 12 LUFS-ish around there, and then I will go and adjust the threshold a little bit until I can hear it getting as loud as I want it to get, or as loud as we can possibly get it without destroying any of the cymbals or crushing the mix down too much. So that's how I use my master bus on these kind of songs, on all songs.
Set fire to Babylon.
Move stuff around here. That's the Lursen with that C4 off. C4 back on again. And then turn off the Lursen and turn on the Ozone. It sounds almost the same, but louder. So that's Set Fire to Babylon. That is how we have the mix right now. I might go back and change the master bus on that as I get through the. We're doing 4 singles for each of the albums, doing the videos for those singles. In the meantime, I'm mixing a whole pile of other albums I've got going on, and then I'll go back and mix the other 14 or 15 songs. One of the nice things about not releasing things to CDs is you're not limited to 74 minutes or whatever of music. So artists are releasing single and single and single, and then we're doing like, here's 20 songs, like, go nuts. Like, these are the songs that are, this era of my life kind of thing. Like, this is Andy, the first 10 years kind of thing. So you're not really limited to how much time you've got on an album. So, or how little time you have on an album. Like EPs, very few people do EPs. Like, I'm not going to release these 4 songs as an EP. I mean, they're not demos. Like, this is it. This is what the band sounds like. It's cool. So, here's your 4 songs. We'll get those up on iTunes and Spotify and everywhere else, and go from there. Looking for sync deals and what have you. So anyway, that's kind of what the Kabal album is going to sound like, and I really have not much else to say about this particular song.